Good morning. I know a lot of us had a rough night, so I appreciate everyone being here. My name is Randy Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of External Relations at the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications. All fits on one business card. A 2022 Pew Research study showed that of the 1,761 State House reporters, they identified only 850, or 48%, that were reporting on state issues full-time. That number has fallen from 904 in 2014. News organizations are cutting back despite the impact that state government has on citizens' everyday lives. To help incent more coverage of state government and politics, UF in 2020 launched the $25,000 Collier Prize for State Government Accountability to recognize excellence in state-level investigative journalism. Over the past 4 years, the nearly 300 entries have demonstrated the extent of corruption at the state level. The session today will provide case studies of award-winning state-level investigative reporting. Our panelists today represent this year's Collier Prize winners, and they will share their strategies and experiences covering state government. Our first speaker is Erin Einhorn. Erin is a Detroit-based national reporter for NBC News and a 2023 Spencer Education Journalism Fellow at Columbia University. Her award-winning work has appeared in The Atlantic, The Nation, The Washington Post, and the public radio program This American Life. Previously, she was founding editor of Chalkbeat Detroit, a nonprofit education news site where she won the Education Writers Association prestigious Ronald Moskowitz Prize for Outstanding Beat Reporting in 2017, and a second National Education Beat Reporting Prize in 2018. Erin was part of a collaboration with the Marshall Project and ProPublica that won third place in the Collier Awards this year for exposing abusive conditions inside a Louisiana state facility for juvenile offenders that were considered troublemakers. Please welcome Erin Einhorn.
Hi. So I wanted to talk a little bit about collaboration. So, I started my career in the last century, and I've worked in Detroit, I've worked in Philadelphia, I've worked in New York, really competitive newspaper towns where the culture was very much reporters at other papers are our enemy. We work against them. We do everything we can to beat them. And honestly, that leads to a lot of really bad journalism. Like scoops for scoop's sake, like, oh, we have the scoop and it's really nothing. Or like just rushing and just, really it's about getting it first. And I always felt that was crazy because, I'd be working hard to try to get documents or insight out of an agency I was covering or out of the government, and the government's stymieing me, and the other reporters are experiencing the same thing. And I always thought it's crazy that reporters don't just work together, which is one of the things that I really love about this moment in journalism, with all the nonprofits and just this sort of sense of like journalism has been gutted in so many ways, but now we can kind of connect with each other, which is sort of how like this story. So this is the NBC version of this story. This is the Marshall Project version of the story. This is the ProPublica version of the story. So we all ended up having the same story. And I actually, the two reporters I worked with on it were just really extraordinary, and we all kind of brought different things to it. And it was really just such a great project. So I just wanted to sort of like make a plug for collaboration that, when you kind of happen on another reporter covering the same thing, instead of like racing out your story to beat them, consider working with them, which is really kind of how this happened. So in 2021, I'm an education reporter. I was trying to figure out like, what happened to education for, juvenile detention, juvenile detainees during the pandemic. I started looking for data. I'm calling experts, and an expert happened to mention to me, I was just having this conversation with another reporter from the Marshall Project, and I was like, who? And so he put me in touch with Beth Schwartzapple, who's amazing, and she and I, decided to work together. We started gathering data. We started calling advocates all over the country. We struggled a little bit to kind of find the right angle until we connected with advocates in Louisiana, the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, who said, well, if you're doing something on education and juvenile detention, we just found out about a secret child jail in Louisiana that nobody even knew about, and they're not providing education to children at all. And I was like, what? And they said that this had come out during a hearing for a juvenile detainee who, was just sort of, the judge was asking him, how's he doing in school? And this young man said, well, I'm not getting an education at all anymore. And she's like, what? And, well, what do you do all day? Oh, well, we're locked in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. Just, what? And nobody, I talked to numerous people who were in this courtroom, nobody in the room, the prosecutors, the defense lawyers, like advocates who happened to be in the room, nobody had even heard of this facility. It was truly a secret secret kiddie jail, basically. This was a complaint that the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights had filed, saying that that this facility had been systematically denying all students, including students with disability, access to education for the entirety of their detention. But this was tricky, right? Because, it's a juvenile hearing. We heard the judge was so angry about it that she actually held the state's Office of Juvenile Justice in contempt of court. But none of it's documented because it's juvenile court. We had no way of doing it. We call an attorney who had represented the kid who was testifying that day in court, and he tells us a couple of things. He tells us, he backs up the story. He said that it was like a. He said it was as if a secret prison had been opened up. I could see on the judge's face both shock and real anger, visceral anger. He puts us in this courtroom, and he tells us something else. He says, oh, well, I've been talking to a ProPublica reporter about this. So suddenly our two-reporter collaboration became a three-reporter collaboration. And we connected with Annie Waldman from ProPublica, who was in fact also working on the same story. And she was actually in New Orleans and able to do a lot of the on-the-ground reporting. And it just really worked out well. We still didn't have very much to go on. So but now there's three reporters. So we actually literally made a list of every defense lawyer who handled juvenile cases in the state of Louisiana and divided up a list and called everybody. And we made a list of every person who could potentially have worked in that facility, and we called everyone. We just flooded the zone. We emailed, LinkedIn, Facebook, however we could reach them. Because there were three of us, and we really were able to do that. And we started pulling together. We filed a whole bunch of public records requests. We filed, I think, 13 public records requests for 911 calls, for incidents and things like that. Oh, and we started, and then this was actually another thing. Sorry, I'm unfocused, but we had to try to find. We had all the. Actually, let me back up. We had what we needed to find was a kid who was in there, which is really tough to find because it's not public. But then we found out that the state of Louisiana had been having all these problems with kids escaping. And in Louisiana, this is a little bit appalling, but whenever a kid would escape from a juvenile facility, they would release his mugshot. So I just grabbed you could sort of see the top of the mugshots because I thought it was so appalling that they were putting these mugshots out there that I just sort of cropped it there so you could see. But because they were doing that, we had names of kids who were in these facilities. And so we started tracking down their parents and talking to them. And honestly, these mothers, this one mother we talked to was just had been telling us this tale about her child with severe mental health issues she'd been begging for help for since he was a little boy, and now he was 15, and the state was just calling him, they had called him Houdini because he escaped so often, and they kept putting out his mugshot. And we started to reach, it was so clear. So then we started filing these public records requests. We filed, accident reports, incident reports, unusual occurrence reports, emails. We got audio of 911 calls, and we started piecing together. In fact, we were able to document that kids were being held in solitary for 23 hours a day. When they were let out to shower, they were being handcuffed with leg irons. They were, in fact, getting absolutely no education at all. And the kids were so desperate, they were breaking their beds and then using the bits of beds to chunk out holes in the walls. And so they started taking the beds out. And then they started breaking the light fixtures, and they were using the light fixtures to try to escape. And so they took the lights out. So now the kids are in the dark on a mattress on the floor. And all this really kind of horrific stuff started happening. And when we broke up, then we started getting staff members on the phone and things like that from all of our outreach, and somebody had gotten video and audio. And so this actually kind of leads us to another collaborator. So I work for NBC News. We have a digital video unit, and they made a little video, which is kind of like a greatest hits of the project. So I'm going to see if I can try to do that now. Alt-Tab, hold on, wait. Where's the Alt, though? Oh, here, Alt-Tab, oh, look, and play, wait. There we go. Oops, nope. I need to, oh, there, yes. Oh,
A juvenile facility in Louisiana is accused of violating the civil rights of minors. Now, advocates and families are speaking out.
He's basically being housed like a death row inmate.
Right now, he's been in 24-hour solitary.
NBC News, ProPublica, and the Marshall Project conducted a 4-month-long investigation into the Acadiana Center for Youth in St. Martinville. What critics call a child prison run by Louisiana's Office of Juvenile Justice, or OJJ.
We're told not many people have seen it, so we will see how this goes.
So we're not able to see or...
No, ma'am. I'm sorry.
We've never been inside, but obtained exclusive video from a former St. Martinville staff member. And what we've heard is disturbing.
His nose is bleeding, there's blood all over the floor. Being beat up right now.
According to OJJ incident reports and firsthand accounts, the 24-cell juvenile facility held minors in cells for 23 or at times 24 hours a day, subdued teens with police-style maneuvers, and at times held minors in shackles or what the facility calls leg irons outside their cells. According to the OJJ, most of the juveniles are black. St. Martinville also failed to provide education to minors for at least 3 months.
We were working to get that established the entire time. That was not something that we were just getting negligent on. All of the things that we are providing them by the law are on board now.
But those who've been inside say conditions are unacceptable. Rashad, a black 16-year-old, is one of them. This is his lawyer.
I believe that the conditions under which he was being confined violated his rights.
We're using Rashad's middle name to protect his identity. He was moved to St. Martinville last summer.
He was not receiving the substance abuse counseling that had been ordered by the court.
The judge immediately ordered he be removed from the facility. But today, there are still youth at St. Martinville, like 16-year-old Ben. This is his bedroom. He hasn't been in it for 2 years.
Do you have access to school?
all right, I don't think we need to see the end, but, whoops, you can get the sense of it. But, oh, whoops, we lost the thing. Wait, hold on, where's the other? We need to go back to the previous one. Oh, sorry. Anyway, I'll just, but sort of, so in any event, this, this is Louisiana, and it can be quite difficult to get impact on a sort of a criminal justice matter in Louisiana. They kind of pride themselves down there on being like tough on crime. But what we've uncovered at this facility was so appalling and so shocking that the legislature actually, after this reporting, I still can't get to the next slide. But yeah, I need to see. We need to go back to the other one. Hold on, is it there? Maybe no. Anyway, I won't show you the slide. But basically, the conclusion is that they ended up passing legislation that banned the use of solitary confinement for juveniles. So it was, so at least, and they're probably still holding kids in solitary confinement, but at least now there's a legal framework where people can sue because of that, because it's actually illegal in Louisiana. So it was a worthy collaboration. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Erin. Our next presenter is Sarah Blasky, an investigative journalist for Miami Herald, where she was part of the team that won the 2022 Pulitzer Prize for reporting on the collapse of the residential condo building in Surfside, Florida. Her work has also been recognized by the Scripps Howard Awards for Excellence in Local Investigative Reporting, the George Polk Award for Political Reporting, and the Webby Awards for Future Reporting. Before joining the Herald in 2018 as a local government reporter, she was a freelancer based in Central America. Sarah was part of a team that won second prize in the Collier competition for uncovering details of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' order to fly 49 South American asylum seekers to Martha's Vineyard as part of what he described as a political statement about immigration enforcement. Please welcome Sarah.
I'm Sarah. How do I advance this? All right. So just a little bit about me. I'm an investigative reporter at the Miami Herald, and part of my job in Florida, we make a lot of news in Florida, and then we do investigations after that news is made. So as was mentioned, a condo building collapsed, killing 98 people a few years ago. That was a breaking news situation that had all kinds of implications. the investigative team at the Miami Herald in those kind of situations, we get involved, we do the deeper dives, we do that kind of thing. And so I want to talk a little bit about investigating off of breaking news. So I'm going to tell you about the story that we did that we're talking about here today, which is, as mentioned, Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida last year, surprise, sent 49 recently arrived migrants to Martha's Vineyard. Nobody knew they were coming. They ended up outside of a community center. And the news kind of trickled out over 24 hours that, oh, the governor of Florida took credit for this thing. And oh, no, those migrants weren't in Florida. They were in Texas. And somehow they got recruited from Texas, put on a plane, and ended up in Martha's Vineyard. So this becomes a huge story, especially because, as we now know, Governor Ron DeSantis is running for president. But people knew that he was going to at that time, and so there was a lot of attention on this story. So I just want to talk about like a couple of things, and if there are takeaways, these should be them, I think. So day one on these kind of stories is super important. I'm going to give you some tips, tricks, lessons I learned throughout the process. Staying organized is also super important. You may think that you're going to remember where everything is, but you won't unless you have a system. And also, how do you break news, but also do an investigation? It is possible. So day one, right? All of these people are in Martha's Vineyard, and the Herald sends a colleague of mine up there to start doing interviews, talking to people, cover the story, what's going on. Nobody really knows, but what becomes clear quickly is all of these folks are saying, I was recruited from outside a migrant resource center in San Antonio, Texas, by a woman named Perla, and no, we don't have any pictures or any documents or anything like that. And we're like, okay, this is gonna be tricky. Perla. Don't have a last name, don't have anything. But people started circulating a couple of photos, and they kept talking about this Perla, right? And this is where a couple of these day one lessons come from. So you don't just need quotes. If you're gonna do an investigation off of a breaking news story, you need sources, right? So think about that as you're gathering those quotes, as you're looking for the money quotes. And remember that just because someone doesn't want to go on the record on day one, doesn't mean that they're not an important source for what you're doing. And so get their phone numbers, stay in touch, that kind of thing. You're going to want to call them back. You're going to want to have that line of communication because, a few days down the line, you might realize, oh, I forgot to ask if they texted any of their family members or something on the day that they were going to fly out, right? We need contemporary or contemporaneous records to kind of prove that people did what they said they did, or they came from where they said they were coming from, right? And text messages and those sort of things that people do, that you do. You send a WhatsApp to your friend, you send a voice note. Those kind of things that we just generate in our daily lives, those can be really important lessons and records for an investigation. And so you want to be able to call them back and say, I know you said you didn't have any plane tickets, but do you have any, emails that you sent about doing this? Can you show me? And you want to use those to start establishing a timeline. When did something happen? Who was there? Who might you need to look for? That sort of thing. And you also want to file your first records requests that day, right? You don't want to get behind on your records requests. Think of what a government agency might have. In Florida, you can get text messages, emails, all of that kind of thing from the government. If a government agency, which in this case, it was the Florida Department of Transportation that ran this program, if a government agency is part of this, you can get the communications about it, you can get all kinds of stuff. And so I'm gonna take a little break here and show you what our records request tracking spreadsheet looks like, because this thing saves my life every day. So this is the actual sheet that we used for the migrant flight stories, and you'll see that it's color-coded. So you have a date, you have the actual language of the request, the government agency that we put it into, which journalist filed the request. You'll see my colleague Nick filed most of these, and the status of the request. And the status is a little drop down, and it actually changes those colors for me. And I just duplicate this spreadsheet every time I start a new anything and go from there because it helps with tracking. And when inevitably a government agency says, oh no, we are not going to give you those records. We disagree. That's not a public record. We can then take this spreadsheet to our attorneys and say, we've done this kind of follow-up. Here's exactly what we have outstanding. And can you please send them a letter and remind them that by law they need to give us these records? And then we go from there. But this spreadsheet is used by reporters, but also our attorneys. So it's just a really good way to stay organized. And then you'll see all the way on the right of the spreadsheet, like links to Google Drive folders. We get the records, we put them in a Google Drive folder, and they're linked right there, so you can never lose them. All right, so that was day one, whew, right? Now we're on to the rest of the breaking news days. So very quickly, we realized we were in the wrong state. We shouldn't be in Florida, we shouldn't be in Massachusetts, we should actually be in Texas. So we went to Texas, where these folks were recruited. We went all the way to the border, to Eagle Pass. This is the border crossing many of them started at. Then we also went to San Antonio, the Migrant Resource Center, where these folks were recruited. And I gotta be honest, my editor said, well, what are you gonna find? And I said, well, something. I'm not sure, right? There's a little bit of you just gotta trust that you're gonna go really hard and you're gonna dig everywhere and you're gonna keep moving forward. And that from that, you're going to be able to turn something up. And editors hate that answer, so come up with a better answer when you're pitching for travel, but that's the truth. So this is kind of like the first 2 weeks, tips and tricks. This is uploaded to the ONA website, so if you want to go look again, feel free. So there is no substitute for being on the ground, right? Being there, talking to people, and I recognize that this is sort of a privileged thing to say. I've worked in local news for a long time. I know that budgets are tight and travel isn't always possible. And there are ways to use social media and other things to do reporting like this. But if you can travel, do travel, go to these places. And I'm really grateful to the Miami Herald editors for recognizing that we needed to do this. In order to hold our own state government accountable, we had to go to, I think it was 4 different states throughout the process of this reporting. But I went to Texas. And so this second point here is kind of what I was saying, you don't always know exactly where you're going. You show up in San Antonio and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I don't know any of the government officials. I just got here. What do I do? And the answer is just go to places where it happened and start talking to people. I know it sounds super simple, but that will generate ideas. I mean, you heard that too. You call advocates, people that work in the area, anyone you can think of. You just keep going, right? And it'll become clearer and clearer what your next story is going to be, right? And you can break news off of the things that you hear from people, and that helps you get sources, right? So do a story on one thing, someone else calls you. So a couple other things, ask for help. People love being involved. I went to the Migrant Resource Center and talked to a bunch of people living there and said, have you ever seen this recruiter? What do you think? They said, yeah, we've seen him. I said, well, can you talk to other people who've maybe seen him too? Maybe someone has a video, so we have this huge network on WhatsApp of all of these different people who just want to be involved in the process. People think our jobs are really cool, and a lot of people want to help you as long as you ask. So this last part, when sourcing, recognize when to push and when to pump the brakes, I'm going to come back to, because this is the most important lesson about sourcing on breaking news. And I know, you got to be first. Everybody is in the same place as you. The New York Times is there, CNN is there, and NBC is there. Everybody's there. You're all going for the same sources. You're looking for the same people. Who's Perla? Who's going to talk to her first? Your editors are like, don't get scooped. And then someone, a source, potentially says, I don't want to talk to you. What do you do, right? Sometimes it makes sense to push, and there isn't a formula that I can give you here, but I'm just going to tell you a story about when it made sense not to. So Perla was an American citizen, but she recruited a Venezuelan migrant who had recently arrived to help her connect with this community, to recruit people onto these flights. And we found him through this network of people that I had helping me. And I sent him a message because he didn't answer my phone call and said, hey, I'm from the Miami Herald, would love to hear your story. He says, get lost, basically, in less nice terms than that. He says the media is out to get him, all of these things. We've all heard it before. And so I say, okay, I respect that. I'm sure this has been really hard for you. I can't even imagine being like, one day you're just a person walking around doing something to try to get by in life, and the next day you are the headline of every major news publication, honestly, almost in the world, right? So no worries. And that was it. I said, I hope things go better for you. Fast forward one day, he texts me back and says, do you want to get coffee? I want to talk to you about some things. So just that little moment of humanity and not being too pushy was actually what got us access to this source. And he ended up talking to me. I went to coffee telling him he didn't have to go on the record. We would just talk. I wanted to hear what happened to him. He could decide afterward. And I know this is like journalism not 101 because they tell you never let a source decide afterward. But sometimes with vulnerable sources like this, it makes sense to say, see how you feel about me when we talk, and then we can talk about what you might want to go on the record with, how you might want to be identified. And he decided he was okay going on the record with his first name only, and that everything else he shared text messages, he shared all kinds of things that helped us put together a story. And so throughout the course of our reporting, we actually broke a bunch of this news while reporting. So this story about the operatives linked to the DeSantis promise to fly migrants to Delaware story. That was an exclusive story that we got because that network of people that I had asked to help came in and they said, hey, there's another plane and it's waiting to launch. And I said, what? And they said, yes, and we know where the folks are staying, which hotel they're staying in as they recruit. They had to build up to 50 people. So, once they had 20, where do they keep folks until the plane is full? So they told us where the hotel was, and we got a room in that hotel and waited there for the bus to show up. And this is them getting on the bus to actually not go to the airport. This is kind of a long tangent, so I'm not going to go into it. But that flight ended up getting canceled in large part because of the press attention. And the other thing is impact, right? So the impact of this reporting was that the Texas sheriff started getting interested in whether or not this was a potentially criminal act. And so he launched an investigation while we were still there. We get this exclusive because we're there on the ground, we're taking time, we're being, thorough. And just recently, he actually recommended criminal charges for those folks who were involved in this operation that, again, was sponsored with Florida taxpayer dollars. So that's it. This is Emmanuel right there. This is our sort of big step back story. It happened about a month after the flights happened. I know everybody wants breaking news and all the exclusives to happen right then at that time, but that month of time was critical in making him feel comfortable and also for us to get some records back. We got some text messages back from the government. We could tell different parts of the story and which government officials were actually, participating with this operation on the ground in Texas, texting back and forth. And so that amount of time allows this bigger step back, allows us to tell the full story from the beginning and all the way through. And so that's kind of like the very fast-paced cycle of this investigation, which happened off of breaking news. That's it.
Okay, so our final presenter is Harriet Ryan, an investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Times. Since joining the news organization in 2008, she has written about high-profile people, including Phil Spector, Michael Jackson, and Tom Girardi, and institutions including USC, the State Bar of California, the Catholic Church, and the Kabbalah Center, and Purdue Pharma. She won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting with colleagues Matt Hamilton and Paul Pringle in 2019. The Los Angeles Times was the first place winner this year for a series by Harriet and Matt Hamilton about failures of the State Bar of California to regulate and enforce the integrity of lawyers in the state. Please welcome Harriet Ryan.
Thank you. I'm here representing myself and Matt Hamilton, my reporting partner. And we are both very grateful to the University of Florida and to the Collier family and for this prize for our series. And this is actually video of Matt, who got to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner and accept our prize in person. And he is talking to President Biden about something they have in common, which is Catholic schools in Wilmington, Delaware. And I got this trip here to Philadelphia to talk to you guys. So we just heard from two great reporters about investigative reporting and how either something can happen in breaking news, or you can get a tip, or several people can get a tip that's going to help you uncover a story that you could have never imagined. And I'd like to talk to you about an approach to investigative reporting for finding great stories that is definitely less impressive. And it's potentially a little embarrassing to talk about at a journalism conference, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to offer it to you as a possible idea, and that is reporting on open secrets. So you know how they say, write about what you know? This is like report about what everybody already knows. And when I say everybody, I don't actually mean everybody. I mean people that are powerful, people that are insiders, what they tell you off the record, what they tell you over drinks or lunch, gossip. And when I say what everybody knows, it's definitely quotey fingers, because these kind of things have not been nailed down, but people talk about them as if they're facts. And there are open secrets in every beat, in every town, and I'm just going to give you some of the ones that I've got over the course of my career. Some of these turned into great investigations. Some of them probably should have, but I was too young or stupid to do them. They've been shaking people down for years. He's a predator, she's on the take. It's essentially a Ponzi scheme. He's a plushie who got paying for sex on Ventura Boulevard. We did not get that one. They spent the fire prevention money on a trip to Las Vegas. So the one that brought us here today is this guy, Tom Girardi. He was for decades one of the most important lawyers in California. He did billion-dollar class action settlements. He was on a first-name basis with governors, Supreme Court justices, both national and state, and many of the judges who are currently on the federal and state bench in California were handpicked by Tom Girardi because he was so powerful. If you don't know that name, maybe you know this movie. Aaron Brockovich is based on his most famous piece of litigation, which is a toxic tort case involving Mojave Desert towns that were polluted. And possibly you, if you're a political reporter, you would know him because he's one of the biggest political donors to the Democratic Party, gave millions to all these people. He had a huge fundraiser in LA for Biden in 2019. But some of you out there will know him for this reason. His wife is on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And even though it's called Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, they actually live in this mansion in Pasadena. So they don't live there anymore. They lost everything. So Matt and I were both legal reporters for many years before working at the LA Times. And as legal reporters, you would know Tom Girardi, you would cover his cases and his settlements. So at the beginning of 2020, we were brainstorming what should we work on this year, talking about different things. And we both realized that we'd heard crazy rumors about him over the years, about this seemingly untouchable guy, just like really odd stuff. And I wrote a memo for my boss about what I was going to do that year, and you can see Tom Girardi's number 4. But we'd proposed doing like an investigative profile, and we said there have been rumors about his ethics for years. I recently heard that he's been sued so many times by clients that his firm has to insure itself because no company will. Additionally, several years ago, a former federal prosecutor accused Girardi of bribing a mediator. So our boss bought this idea, and let's see. Yeah. So then COVID hit, so then we just worked on COVID for a long time. But anyway, that fall we got back to it, and we started calling people that had worked at the firm, or we knew him, and nobody would talk to us. I mean, he was just too powerful. And they would sometimes go off the record to be like, no, like everyone knows what's going on there. I'm not going to talk to you about that. And so we couldn't get anything out of sources at that time. But it ended up not mattering because once we started scrubbing the public records, we realized that the entire story was there and had been in some form for decades, literally decades. And so while Matt and I are very grateful to have won this prize, this story could have been written in some form in 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015. So beginning in December 2020, we published a series, it's like 2.5 years, more than that. We've published a lot of stories. And what we've demonstrated is not just like Tom Girardi was like a crook, but that he had corrupted everything he touched, and that was the legal and political system in California. And so it's believed by the federal government, which is prosecuting him and some of his associates for wire fraud and other charges in 2 jurisdictions, that he stole tens of millions of dollars over the decades, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars, and that his firm was essentially what they have called a Ponzi scheme, and that he used that money to maintain his firm's reputation, and the opulent lifestyle that he and his wife enjoyed. And this is one of the first investigations that we published back in March 2021. And it showed how Girardi had infiltrated the State Bar of California, which is supposed to police the legal system and just only let people that are ethical hold licenses. And Tom Girardi had a pristine law license, and he was on like the Judicial Council of California and other very insidery type groups, despite the fact that he had scores of legal malpractice lawsuits, and it would later emerge more than 150 complaints against him with the State Bar. And we showed how he had cultivated these very cozy relationships with investigators, executives, trustees, all at the State Bar, as well as with the Supreme Court of California, which oversaw the State Bar. He treated them to boozy lunches, rides on his private plane, invitations to Vegas parties, jobs for their children, even free legal representation. In one case, in a suit someone was having against their general contractor. Who can't relate to that? Almost all of the information we used was from public records requests and filings. This is another one from last summer. It's about how Girardi's schemes relied on assistance from very prestigious people in the legal field, retired judges working as private arbitrators. These guys make about $1,500 an hour, and no one questions them. And they oversee a lot of big settlements. And Girardi had these very incestuous relationships with them. And in this one of the cases we wrote about, we were able to show that this one of these prestigious arbitrators had overseen a settlement where Girardi used $750,000 to buy his wife, this woman, these diamond earrings. So he used settlement money to buy these diamond earrings. Again, this is all from court records. This is another one we did, just raising the possibility, asking the question of whether the money all these people got from him was basically stolen from clients. Only Amy Klobuchar returned money. Okay. So that, again, as I'm sure you guys know, the donations are all public. That could have been written at any point or scrutinized at any point. And this is just some other fun ones. Here, he used $300,000 in settlement money to buy his mistress, who was a sitting appellate court judge, a beachfront condo in Santa Monica. This is one from last December that looked at when the State Bar wasn't going after fat cats like Girardi, the power players, the people who had enormous practices and dealt with large sums of money. What were they doing? They were training their investigative resources on people with little resource to fight back. And that resulted in blackmail lawyers, for example, being nearly 4 times as likely to be disbarred. And we showed cases where these men who were just regarded by the bar as low-hanging fruit had their careers wrecked over essentially what were technicalities. This is one from earlier this year about how Girardi created influence with the local Secret Service and ended up getting the agency to launch this highly questionable investigation into a Hollywood costume designer who got in crosswise with his wife over her cat suits. The story involves drag queens. It's worth a read. And lastly, we highlighted how 49 states have a law that requires or encourages attorneys to report misconduct by peers. It's called the snitch law or the rat rule. There's only one state that didn't have such a rule, and that was California. And now it has such a rule as of August 1st, thanks to her reporting. So we've gotten a lot of results from our reporting. There's been a lot of reforms. There are new laws for handling client money. And the bar has also done like a series of investigations that just like officially bore out what we'd already reported. One, for example, found that Girardi gave a State Bar investigator and his wife, a USC professor, more than $1 million in cash and gifts. So just this month, there was yet another investigation confirming a lot of our reporting that came out, and it included these emails that had been exchanged among the leadership of the bar when our first story that I showed you, the one about the Vegas parties, came out. And the chair of the bar wrote to his colleagues the following: "We have a real scandal in our hands, and we need to get to the bottom of it." And it always makes me laugh because they all knew about John Tardy. The scandal was that the Muggles found out about the scandal. It wasn't the actual scandal. It was that it was published in the LA Times, and the public knew what the insiders had always known. And so my pitch to you today is that tackle open secrets. They're often gettable, and when you make the powers that be contend with them, real change can happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Anybody have any questions? Please step up to the microphone, and we'll be glad to address them. I have one question is that you've all sort of covered government at different levels. Is there any peculiarities about covering state government that you've seen versus other levels of government? No?
I think we all wish we lived in Florida, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's nothing weird about Florida.
But in terms of being a journalist and covering state versus local government, or
I think it really does depend on the state. I mean, I live in a state, Michigan, where the governor and the legislature are exempt from public records laws. It's the opposite of Florida. So, I mean, there's certain, like, idiosyncrasies, I think. And it's also the sort of size of a state, right, in the sense of, like, I mean, you can't, it's sort of hard to do a story about, like, a state, because the story at the end of the day has to be about specific people. So if you're starting from the perspective of, like, this whole state, you really it still has to come down to the individual examples and who are the people whose lives were affected, and so every story ultimately is a local story of that. You can find multiple local stories and connect them.
and public records requests, is there any difference at different levels of government? Is it harder at state level?
So this is something that I am routinely surprised by, and I'm not sure why, but at this point, but sometimes I don't know who has the record. I'm sure anyone that's put in a records request before has had that experience where you're like, so I want this particular form. Let's say it's a gift disclosure form that a politician routinely has to file. Is it filed with the State Ethics Commission? Is it filed with the County Ethics Commission? Is it filed with some other agency I've never heard of? Who do I ask for this record? And I think that's one of the things that's interesting about reporting on state government. It touches a lot of different, like, hyper-local things. There are a lot of things within the state government agencies like the Ethics Commission that have sort of local tendrils. The Department of Health in Florida has all of these different county departments that are sort of autonomous, but sort of definitely not. So I feel like getting the lay of the land for me has been, it's an ongoing pursuit in Florida, and I think that's probably different in every single state, exactly how the government is structured. And so my best advice is ask someone who knows. Don't feel embarrassed that you don't know which agency has something, because it's probably a legitimate question.
I had a question about public records. You talked about getting text messages earlier from government officials, and that's something. I'm in Florida too. That's something I've always, considered when working on a story, just to really get to the bottom of something. But I've always kind of been skeptical of it, because I wonder, if a government official, I understand, like, you can possibly get text messages, like if a government official is sending text messages on, like, a government device. But if they're discussing government business on a personal cell, that's still public record. But, like, what's stopping that person? I'm ignorant of, like, the process of how someone enforces that they get those text messages. Like, if I'm a government representative and I'm told I need to send these text messages, and I see that there's something really bad on it, what's stopping them from just, like, deleting it or not sending it? And what is that mechanism for enforcing that? If you know. Yeah, I'm just-
So it is a public record, even if it's on a private phone, if it's about something that is public business, you know. So in the case of the migrant flights, if it was about this program, if they were talking about anything to do with that program, that makes it a public record. But you're right, and I wonder about this too, how many things get deleted. In the state of Florida, it would be illegal to use disappearing messages for a public official to use, you know, like Signal's disappearing messages or WhatsApp's disappearing messages. But, you know, how do we know if they did? Well, sometimes things come out, right? Sometimes you have a source who shows you a text message that you didn't get as part of a records request. Or you see in a different records request, they've given you a screenshot of Signal and you see, you know, has enabled disappearing messages on whatever date, and then disabled disappearing messages. And you're like, this person uses disappearing messages. That is highly suspect. And then you write a story that's like, hey, this politician's been using disappearing messages. That could be a no-no, right? So I would say, you know, there's an extent to which public records are not enough, right? You also have to have sources who you can bounce these things off of, who can tell you maybe there's not, maybe you haven't gotten everything that you should. And then also, again, where resources allow, attorneys help us go back to these government agencies and say, hey, you know, you didn't produce this record. Are you pretty sure that you've produced everything else, or you want to check again? Because again, that's illegal. So it would be the same sort of thing in like court discovery as part of a lawsuit. That's kind of how I think about it. It's not exactly the same, but that's, you know.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Harriet mentioned in her story that there was a reform as a result of that story at the state bar level. Have you two seen other reforms based on the stories that you wrote?
Yes,
I mean,
or juveniles in.
Yeah, we are the impact that we got from that story was the law in Louisiana banning solitary confinement for juveniles. And I mean, you know, you kind of like to believe that, you know, even in a, you know, where you don't actually get a law passed, that just the people's knowledge of it, you know, can just, you know, sort of at least sort of highlight for people that this isn't okay, so that like when they are involved in something, you know, I mean, and this is kind of the thing, right? Like, one of the ways we were able to kind of, quote, get inside a facility that was completely locked, that we couldn't get inside of, and we had trouble, you know, the sources were locked up in there and couldn't call us. It was that staffers knew it was wrong, and they all have a phone in their pocket, and they all got, you know, so we were able to get video from people who knew it was wrong. And so by sort of telling these stories and putting it on people's radar that this is a thing that can happen, is that you're creating future whistleblowers.
In Florida, technically nothing has changed. The Florida government would tell you that they are still doing this so-called migrant relocation program, and they are. But there have been some actual changes in practice. One of them is that they are no longer recruiting minors to these programs, so kids are not being sent as they were to Martha's Vineyard. And also the program stopped for over 6 months, so they were going to have another flight to Delaware right after the first flight to Martha's Vineyard, but because of the reporting and honestly the attention from law enforcement, they paused the program for a long time. And so there have been other flights. They went to Sacramento, California recently, and but again, they had more information. One of the things that came out right was that they had sort of not given the migrants to Martha's Vineyard any information. Well, they gave a lot more information to the folks going to Sacramento, and again, no kids. So there have been some actual changes, even though they would not tell you that that's the result of the reporting.
Great. Other questions from the audience? Sir.
Hey, my name is Jabari Gibbs. I'm a part of the student newsroom this year, and I had a question regarding local newsrooms. In America right now, over half of the 220, like 300 counties plus in America, about 200 only have a local newspaper, and a lot of news vacuums do exist. So how do you feel about the things that could be happening on the local level that may not get the attention from the state, and how can you approach that with less resources or whatnot?
I mean, it's like a huge problem. And when I was starting out in this business, if you can believe it, I was assigned 3 towns that had a population of less than 2,000 each, and that's all I covered all day long. Right? So I'm sure that sounds like comical to your generation. But I can tell you that like there was stuff going on in Seabright, New Jersey that deserved investigation. And if I hadn't been sitting there asking questions, a lot of weird stuff would have happened. So I think that we talked about like sort of collaborating, but I think also just like really cultivating the people in these communities who share your interest in like ethics and good government. So that could be attorneys, advocates, just the person that always goes to every meeting, whatever, and make it known to these people. We want to know. We are your tip line. Because, yeah, we're not going to have reporters in every town council meeting anymore. So we need the people that do learn about something to call a reporter and say, like, this is worthy of your time. And that is a really kind of, I don't know, not a great solution at all, but it's the only one I can think of right now.
Yeah, and I just wanted to sort of re-plug the collaboration, which I appreciate you mentioning as well, but it's, so I mean, I'm a national reporter for NBC, and I can cover, it's actually a really difficult thing in the sense that like I could cover anything, anywhere, and that's kind of, it's really hard to decide. So if a local reporter calls me up and says, I've been covering, or a student journalist who's been covering their, going to their local town meetings to learn, calls me up and says, I'm covering this town and I heard this thing, but I don't have the resources to tell this story in the way that you would. My first suggestion is, well, let's work together, and I always kind of go, and I've done that a lot on a lot of stories. Sometimes I'm working on something and I'm like, I really need somebody who's on the ground, or I really need somebody who's from this community, who they're going to trust more than me, and then you're bringing in, just a lot more insight, and so I personally love doing that. So, if you've got a great story in your community, let me know. And, if I can't do it, I have, we all have networks and things like that, and I'm always about making sure those stories get out because, other reporters aren't the enemy. We're all in this together, and we're all trying to get to the truth.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Hello. So I wanted to ask about something Sarah touched on earlier, which is about knowing when to push a source. I feel like a lot of these investigative stories are probably like the worst day of someone's life. And, in journalism, we have a culture of trying to get the story first and trying to, please editors. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how you work around that pressure to get the story, but to still treat people like humans, and how do you know if you're hitting a wall and how to get around that? I'm just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Do one of you want to talk about that?
I mean, what I do is I start every sentence or every communication with someone by identifying myself as a reporter. And I do that for many reasons, but one is that I am not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not your lawyer, and I have this role. And the people that we're talking to are intelligent. They are going through something stressful or upsetting, but they're intelligent and they can make good decisions about what they want to do. And for some people, talking to a reporter is a really good decision for them. And for some people, it's not. But I'm not their therapist. They're going to make that decision, and I will accept that decision with respect when they tell me what it is. But I'm not trained to offer people therapy.
I feel like people respect honesty, and they respect an explanation like what you just gave. Sometimes that's the way I deal with sources who are, seem nervous or whatever. I just say, here's what the process would be like. Here, I will ask you hard questions. It's up to you. And then, you respect the answer. Now, sometimes people get nervous afterward. That's a whole different conversation. But I find the best way to deal with that is just by communicating with them frequently. Oh, your deadline has been pushed. The story's not coming out yet. They get more and more nervous as they're waiting and waiting and waiting to see what you're writing about them. As long as you keep in touch and you just say, hey, wanted to let you know, I find that goes a long way. Honesty and transparency about the process.
The other thing to mention is that, I always kind of come into things thinking like, well, why would they talk to me? Like if it was the worst day of my life, I wouldn't want to talk to some stranger about it. But a lot of people feel misunderstood. A lot of people feel they aren't heard, that they aren't listened to. And a lot of people, I actually learned this like in my first job when I did obits. You're always like, I don't want to call somebody on the day that their relative died. But in fact, if you've lost somebody close to you, you really want to talk about them. You really want to talk about what you've been through. And, if you say to them, like, listen, I don't know where this is going. I don't, like, we're going to have a conversation. I may quote you. I may not quote you. We can, if you don't mind, I'd like to record the conversation, but I'm not going to use anything without your permission. Like, let's have this, if it's a real person, obviously, if it's Tom Girardi, you're not going to give him that deal. But if it's like somebody, who's, a child or a mom whose child is in juvenile detention, right? Let's just have a conversation and I'm going to listen. And, at the end of it, we can talk about what you feel comfortable saying on the record, how you want to be identified. I don't have to use your full name. We can use your middle name or, something like that. And I find that I'm often really surprised by people who say, just thank you so much for telling this story, and sure, that's happened to me enough that I can kind of come into it with the confidence that, like, even though it feels a little predatory sometimes, like, I truly am trying to make their lives better and the lives of people like them better, or people who've been through something like this better. And so, if you come into it as a human being, as an honest broker, and say, listen, I'm not going to screw you on this. If you don't want me to report something, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to touch, and then the day before the story runs, I'll call them and say, listen, I'm going to walk you through every single thing that it's going to say about you. I believe that nobody should be surprised by what I'm going to say. And so, and then when the story does run, I always send it to them, or I didn't quote you in this story, but our conversation really helped inform my understanding of the issue, and thank you. Here's the story, here's my number, please stay in touch.
Other questions? Well, please join me in thanking the panel again. Do you have a question? Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I hope it's not inappropriate, but I was wondering if you guys ever feel the need to, like, have security guards or a bulletproof vest when you're out in public, like, because I hear about journalists, like, being in danger and stuff like that. Like, do you ever feel the need to constantly have to protect yourself whenever you're out in public because you're always uncovering, like, political corruption?
No, but I will say that my husband, who works on NBC, when he does shoots in San Francisco now, they have like armed guards with them because of their cameras. That's the only time I can think of it. But I don't know. I've never experienced that. I would hope never to. Have you guys experienced that?
I mean, NBC's policy on a lot of things is that you're not allowed to cover certain things without armed guards. But I didn't feel, like, they made me bring an armed guard to a Black Lives Matter protest, which I felt was like, not necessary. But,
Oh my goodness. I mean, but the situation that I was relating had to do with, like, their concern not about the journalists, but about the camera equipment.
Right.
I think things can be kind of dangerous for journalists, and we do trainings on how to keep yourself safe in the field, and the field now includes Twitter or X or whatever we call it now. There's physical safety, there's also safety when it comes to being doxxed and that kind of thing, and so these conferences often have talks about how to protect yourself, and it's a lot of situational awareness. It's a lot of making sure you have support and you can call your editor, that they know where you are, that you have a phone number in your pocket that's not just in your phone, so if something happens, you can call your editor. There's all kinds of good tips that I've gotten throughout the years that make me feel safe, and none of them are armed guards or, protective equipment. They're just situational awareness and good advice, and so if you've never taken one of those courses, I would recommend it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, please join me in thanking the panel. So the entry period for the 2024 Collier Prize, the $25,000 Collier Prize, will open next month and go through January 31st. It's stories that were covered in the calendar year 2023. So if you want information, you can go to jou.ufl.edu/Collier. But thanks for coming, and have a good rest of the conference.